By 1971, the cat food industry had become what every economist dreads. Self-aware. It had money, ambition, and marketing departments that had completely lost their minds. You see, up until this point, most cat food companies had marketed to humans. The logic was simple. Cats don't watch TV. Cats don't read labels. Cats don't care. So the ads weren't for them. They were for the people buying the cans. The lonely, the loving, the suburban souls who saw their cats as the only creatures who truly got them. But in the early 1970s, some executives began to ask a dangerous question. What if we start marketing to cats through humans? And just like that, the world's most deranged field of research was born. Feline psychology. Teams of white-coated researchers began studying cat behavior with the seriousness usually reserved for rocket science. They filmed cats eating, licking, ignoring, glaring, walking away, and occasionally knocking clipboards off tables. They recorded every twitch, every purr, every subtle insult. And after millions in research funding and years of observation, the conclusion was earth-shattering. Cats are picky. That was it. That was the entire finding. But in corporate America, picky meant opportunity. If cats were picky, then the challenge was not just to feed them, it was to impress them. So the scientists went deeper. They studied palatability, texture preference, and mouthfeel, a word that would soon haunt the dreams of every marketing executive in America. Mouthfeel. Imagine a room full of serious adults in the 1970s arguing passionately about whether a particular cat food had the right mouthfeel, as if they were Michelin chefs competing for the approval of animals that licked their own feet. It was glorious. The war was on. On one side, there was 9 Lives, led by the mighty General Foods Corporation, confident, sleek, and determined to dominate through personality. On the other, Friskies, backed by Purina, relentless, scientific, and armed with data that suggested cats preferred moist morsels, and entering the field like a debutante at a high society luncheon came Fancy Feast, launched by Carnation, which Nestle later acquired, with the most ambitious marketing premise ever attempted. Your cat deserves fine dining. They packaged it in tiny, elegant cans, the kind that looked like they should be opened with white gloves. They filmed commercials that looked like perfume ads, and they hired narrators who sounded like they were reading poetry about salmon mousse. It worked. To Americans started to feel guilty about feeding their cats regular food. They began to associate Pate with moral virtue. 1. Fancy Feast ad literally said, "Show your love the way she deserves," and thus began the arms race of guilt-based marketing. 9 Lives responded by going in the opposite direction: humor, charm, and the now legendary Morris the cat. Morris was a real orange tabby, rescued from a shelter and trained to do what cats do best. Look smug. He became the face of 9 Lives, the world's most finicky cat. In commercials, Morris would reject every brand of cat food except 9 Lives, glaring with the authority of a small furry emperor. His deadpan expression, his bored blinking, his complete lack of enthusiasm. He was perfect. He was the anti-spokesman, while Human celebrities were smiling and selling soda. Morris just sat there, silently judging America's choices. And people loved it. He became a national icon. He was featured in newspapers, TV shows, even a cameo in The Long Goodbye with Elliot Gould. He got fan mail. He had a press agent. He received more invitations to Hollywood parties than most of the executives who owned him. At one point, he was even jokingly floated as a presidential candidate, a concept that, in hindsight, seems far less absurd than many real ones. But behind the glamour, the war was intensifying. The success of 9 Lives forced other brands to escalate their tactics. Friskies doubled down on science. They launched Friskies Buffet, a line of flavors so excessive it sounded like a Vegas casino menu. Ocean whitefish dinner, mixed grill, chicken in sauce, liver, and bacon feast. It wasn't cat food anymore. It was cat theater. Each company poured millions into advertising and research. Every slogan, every jingle, every bite calibrated to trigger a human emotion in a pet that didn't have any. And all the while, the scientists kept trying to understand cats as if they were decoding alien transmissions. In 1970 for internal memo, a researcher reportedly wrote, "Cats are drawn to the smell of liver, but repulsed by its texture. We must simulate the aroma without the reality." It's hard to explain how profoundly weird that sentence is until you realize it was written with absolute sincerity by someone in a lab coat. That's the level of madness money creates. Because by the mid-70s, this wasn't just about cat food anymore. It was about pride. It was about market share. It was about who would win the hearts, minds, and taste buds of creatures that mostly wanted to sleep on your warm laundry. And while companies fought to capture the cat psyche, something else began to happen, something far stranger and far more expensive. Humans started to identify with their cats, and that, dear dreamer, would change everything. Picture it, America, the 1970s, a time of polyester suits, gas shortages, and unexplainable confidence in canned food. The Cold War was simmering, disco was thriving, and somewhere between Nixon's resignation and the invention of the mood ring, the United States found itself locked in one of the most ridiculous economic conflicts in its history. No, not the oil crisis, not the inflation crisis, the cat food crisis, because in the 1970s, corporate America looked at the nation's felines, the aloof, judgmental little deities who ruled suburban homes, and realized something shocking. They were a massive untapped market. This was the decade when pet ownership exploded. Cats, once regarded as practical mouse assassins, had now become pampered indoor companions. And Americans, in true American fashion, began asking the most important question of all. What if we made this about money? It was only a matter of time before giant corporations noticed that there were millions of cats and millions of humans willing to project their emotional needs onto them via meat paste. And thus began the billion-dollar cat food war, a marketing arms race, a full-blown, fish-flavored capitalism crusade. An existential battle fought not with tanks or treaties, but with jingles, jingles, and more jingles. This wasn't just about feeding cats. Oh no. This was about who could convince the American public that their cat had standards. For decades, cats had eaten whatever was cheapest: scraps, leftovers, mystery tins labeled meat flavored. But the 1970s cat was different. The 1970s cat was modern. She had opinions. She demanded gravy. And so, a handful of the most powerful companies in the country, General Foods, Nestle, Ralston Purina, and more, went to war. A war fought. In supermarkets, on television, and in the psyche of every cat owner desperate to believe their pet loved them. And dear dreamer, the story of this war is truly absurd, a comedy of science, manipulation, and marketing gone mad. Because as it turns out, when you spend billions trying to understand what cats want, you end up learning that cats don't care. But that didn't stop anyone from trying. It all began innocently enough. In the 1950s and 60s, cat food was barely an industry. Most people just gave their cats scraps of tuna, milk, or, if they were feeling fancy, a spoonful of something labeled Pushing Boots, which was both a cat food brand and an early warning sign for poor naming choices. Dog food was the real business back then. Dogs were loyal, emotional, family-oriented, easy to market to. But cats were independent, mysterious, self-cleaning. Advertising to cats was like advertising to smoke. Still, by the late 1960s, something was changing. America's population was urbanizing. More apartments meant fewer backyards, and fewer backyards meant fewer dogs. Cats were the perfect urban pet, quiet, low maintenance, and only slightly judgmental about your life choices. By 1970, the number of cats in U.S. households had exploded, past 30 million. And that's when the corporations smelled blood. Or, more accurately, salmon. General Foods, already dominating the dog food market with Kennel Ration, launched 9 Lives, a bold, heavily advertised cat food that promised complete nutrition and personality. Because apparently, nothing says health like personality in a can. Then came Purina with Friskies, boasting meatier meats and better taste. Nestle entered the field with Fancy Feast, marketed as gourmet dining for cats. And just like that, the world's first pet luxury industry was born. You could say it was capitalism's perfect storm. Each company poured millions into marketing, into studies, slogans, and slogans pretending to be studies. They hired psychologists. They hired food chemists. They even hired animal behaviorists to interpret what cats were saying about the food. Which sounds impressive until you realize that cats were mostly saying no. They'd sniff a new brand, take one disdainful lick, and walk away, leaving entire research teams questioning their life choices. But the scientists persevered. One ad executive in 1970 said it best: cats may not speak English, but they do speak profit margins. And soon, America's grocery shelves were lined with cans, pouches, and boxes, all shouting at exhausted cat owners through carefully focused grouped meows. 9 Lives. It's what your cat wants. Friskies. the taste cats ask for by name, Fancy Feast, because your cat is worth it. You could walk down a supermarket aisle in 1975 and feel like you were at a high society luncheon, attended exclusively by carnivorous narcissists. And Americans ate it up, metaphorically, of course, by the mid-70s. Cat food sales were worth over $1 billion a year. That's billion with a B on cat food. And just like that, the war began. Because once money enters the litter box, peace becomes impossible. By 1975, the cat food war had stopped being about food. It had become about identity, because somewhere between the jingles and the gravy, Americans had collectively decided that their cats were no longer just pets. They were personalities. They were roommates. They were children. They were furry little therapists who charged in kibble and tolerated exactly 7 minutes of affection a day. And the corporations noticed suddenly the ads weren't saying, "Feed your cat this." They were saying, "If you love your cat, you'll feed your cat this." It was genius, evil genius. The kind of marketing alchemy that could only be forged in the late 1970s. An era when consumer guilt had just become fashionable, so every brand leaned into it. 9 Lives reminded you that even if your cat ignored you, he deserved respect. Friskies promised complete nutrition, implying that anything less was emotional neglect. And Fancy Feast, oh, Fancy Feast, whispered seductively, you wouldn't eat cold leftovers. Why should she? And America listened. Millions of households began treating their cats not as animals, but as mirror reflections of themselves. Tiny, elegant embodiments of middle-class aspiration. Your cat didn't just eat chicken pate. She deserved chicken pate. It was the same logic that made people buy sports cars and avocado green kitchen appliances. But now, it came in a can dot, and as absurd as it sounds, it worked spectacularly. By 1976, the US cat food market was worth more than $1.5 billion. That's roughly $8 billion in today's money, being spent annually to impress animals that still vomited on the carpet with no remorse. But something deeper was happening, too. This wasn't just a marketing war anymore. It was a cultural shift. Cats were taking over America. One sofa, one shag carpet, one elegantly plated tuna supreme at a time. And it made sense. Dogs had been the mascots of the 1950s and 60s. Loyal, obedient, family-oriented. But the 1970s, that was a cat decade. Detached, stylish, a little cynical. Cats were the perfect pet for a society that was tired of pretending everything made sense. They were mysterious, independent, and weirdly relatable. As one sociologist put it in 1977. Yes, there were cat sociologists. Cats reflect the individualism of modern life. They offer companionship without commitment, which, coincidentally, is also how most people described dating in the 1970s. So, the ads leaned in even harder. Commercials started showing cats lounging on velvet cushions, walking through sunlit apartments, staring out city windows as smooth Jazz played softly in the background. They were no longer pets. They were moods. The camera would pan slowly to a crystal bowl of food, and a voiceover, deep, soothing, slightly unhinged, would whisper something like, "She's not just your cat, she's your muse. Feed her accordingly." It was ridiculous, and it was brilliant, because for the first time, people didn't just want to feed their cats. They wanted to be worthy of their cats. This was the dawn of cat envy, the quiet, existential realization that your pet was living better than you were. And in a way, it was true. Your cat slept 16 hours a day. She got fed on schedule. She ignored problems with dignity. Meanwhile, you were eating cereal for dinner and arguing with your boss about polyester pants. Cats had one dot, and the companies knew it. In corporate boardrooms across America, executives in polyester suits stood in front of charts showing market dominance by flavor. Words like ocean whitefish and turkey giblets in sauce were being spoken in tones once reserved for stock performance and oil futures. They weren't just selling food. They were selling transcendence, but with billions of dollars at stake. The pressure was immense. Each company tried to outdo the others in increasingly absurd ways. 9 Lives introduced dinner variety packs, so cats wouldn't get bored. Purina launched Tender Vittles, the world's first semi-moist cat food, proudly described as chewy, which immediately raised the question, chewy how and fancy feast. Ever the drama queen began running full-page ads that looked like perfume campaigns. One featured a cat in a gold collar beside a crystal dish, with the tagline, "Every meal is an affair." If you didn't know better, you'd think it was for Chanel. No. 5. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, scientists were still locked in their war rooms, desperately trying to understand feline taste buds. A Sisyphean effort that produced such thrilling insights as cats cannot taste sweetness and cats prefer fish, but also sometimes not fish. The truth was, no one knew what cats wanted. They just knew what humans wanted cats to want. And that distinction, that delicious, capitalistic confusion, kept the war alive. Because if cats ever actually told us their opinions, the industry would collapse overnight. But they never did. They never will. And that's exactly how the corporations liked it. By 1977, the billion-dollar cat food war had reached what historians, or at least the kind of historians, who study cat marketing, would later call the perma-dawn. Everything was escalating. Advertising budgets were ballooning. New flavors were being invented faster than actual cats could taste them. And the marketing departments of corporate America had officially lost all contact with reality. What began as a fight over market share had turned into an ideological struggle, a furry Cold War, complete with espionage, propaganda, and the occasional scandal involving mystery meat. But before the scandal, let's talk about the madness. 9 Lives, drunk on the fame of their celebrity mascot, Morris the cat, had transformed him into a full-blown corporate ambassador. He wasn't just a spokescat anymore. He was an icon. He had a publicist, He gave interviews. He authored an autobiography called The Morris Approach, which is perhaps the only self-help book in history, written entirely by a ghostwriter pretending to be a cat. The book included such wisdom as, always keep your dignity, never chase love or lasers, and my personal favorite, humans will always come back. They have to open the cans. It was pure, weaponized charm. But then, in a move straight out of corporate warfare, one of 9 Lives' competitors tried to steal Morris. It's true. Friskies reportedly attempted to poach the world's most famous feline, offering his handler a lucrative deal to switch allegiances. It was the 1970s version of corporate espionage. Only instead of spies trading nuclear secrets, it was executives in leisure suits trying to bribe a cat. The handler refused, of course. Morris was loyal, or at least his contract was. But the message was clear. Nothing was sacred. The war had reached a level of absurdity that would have made Machiavelli cough up a hairball. Then came the scientists. Remember those research teams from earlier, the ones studying mouthfeel and palatability? Well, they'd gotten ambitious. They were now conducting full-blown experiments on feline preference, running controlled tests with groups of cats in sterile labs, complete with mirrored observation rooms, data sheets, and clipboards. You might imagine this looked like a noble scientific pursuit. In reality, it looked like 12 bored cats ignoring 12 bowls of food. While 10 scientists took notes about emotional withdrawal behaviors, one report from 1978 earnestly described how cats exhibited mild depression when fed the same flavor more than 3 days in a row. Another claimed that cats preferred to eat when their food was served in round bowls, rather than square ones. And the companies believed it. Soon, marketing departments were demanding bowl curvature optimization. Packaging designers were summoned to meetings about perceived roundness. Someone in accounting probably cried. Meanwhile, Fancy Feast, ever the diva, was running a full-page magazine ad with the tagline, "If she could talk, she'd ask for Fancy Feast." And somewhere in a boardroom, a man in a turtleneck probably said, "Gentlemen, that's it. We've cracked the code to consciousness." But just when the industry thought it had achieved perfection, the mystery meat scandal hit. It began innocently, with a few consumer complaints that certain cat food brands didn't smell quite right. Now, to be fair, not smelling quite right describes 95% of cat food. But this was different. This smelled industrial. Journalists began to investigate. And what they found was enough to make every cat owner in America pause mid-can opener. Some of the cheaper cat food brands, desperate to compete with the likes of 9 Lives and Fancy Feast, had been using unlabeled animal by Dash products. In other words, the meat wasn't always chicken or beef. Sometimes it was whatever we could find. And sometimes it wasn't technically meat. Reports surfaced of cat food containing everything from roadkill to expired grocery meat too. In one legendary case, processed protein derivatives of uncertain origin. That phrase should never exist. It sounds like something you'd hear in a sci-fi horror movie, right before the alien grows a second head. The scandal sent shockwaves through the industry. Congress got involved. The FDA, suddenly realizing it had never really paid attention to cat food, scrambled to establish truth in labeling standards. Executives gave solemn statements about consumer trust. Scientists were hauled into hearings to explain why some cans contained trace elements of horse. The public, naturally, was horrified, not because their cats were eating weird things. Cats will literally eat rubber bands, but because they had been lied to. Cat food sales plummeted. The entire market, worth over $1 billion, teetered on the brink of collapse. And then, in the midst of chaos, Morris returned. 9 Lives ran a campaign featuring their smug orange mascot staring into the camera with a simple tagline: Morris eats 9 lives and nothing else. It was devastating, elegant. The corporate equivalent of dropping the mic and walking away. The scandal blew over. Sales recovered, and the public, comforted by a cat that looked like he could outsmart a senator, forgave everything. It was the perfect end to Act 2 of this ridiculous capitalist opera. But, of course, the 1970s weren't done yet, because the cat food war, like every war before it, was about to evolve from product to philosophy. The question was no longer which food will cats eat. It was, what does cat food say about us? And that question would lead to some of the strangest advertising in history. By 1978, the cat food war had officially gone postmodern. The scientists were still arguing about palatability factors and texture density. But the marketing teams had ascended to a new plane of lunacy. They had realized something profound, or at least profitable. They weren't really selling food anymore. They were selling emotions, because by this point, Americans didn't want to believe they were feeding their cats. They wanted to believe they were nurturing a relationship. You didn't buy a can of 9 Lives. You bought companionship. You didn't open a pouch of Fancy Feast. You opened your heart. You didn't pour out Friskies. You fulfilled a sacred bond forged in the ancient fires of domestic affection. It was a golden age of melodrama, a time when every product was a metaphor, and every cat commercial was basically therapy. Let's take Fancy Feast. For example, if you watched television in the late 1970s, you might remember their ads. Dimly lit rooms, soft piano music, a cat, always beautiful, always perfectly lit, strolling across a plush carpet, and a voice, hushed, reverent, like it was narrating the birth of a new civilization, saying things like, "She waits for the moment you open the can. That's it." That was the commercial. No information about ingredients, no claims of nutrition, just the quiet, emotional manipulation of an audience desperate for meaning in a world that smelled faintly of salmon. Fancy Feast wasn't just a cat food anymore. It was a mood, a tiny piece of performance art about loneliness and love, sold by the ounce. Meanwhile, 9 Lives kept doubling down on personality. Morris the cat had become not just an ad mascot, but a full cultural phenomenon. He was on talk shows. He endorsed political candidates. He had a fan club, a literal fan club, with membership cards and newsletters. And in a truly bold move, General Foods had him adopt an orphanage. Yes. A corporate-owned cat adopted an orphanage. It was charity, marketing, and absurdist. Theater all rolled into one. But it worked. Because Morris had become something America needed: stability. The late 1970s were chaotic, politically, economically, spiritually. The Cold War was back on. Inflation was climbing. Everyone was tired. And in the midst of it all, here was a cat who seemed utterly unbothered. Cool, calm, judgmental, but in a comforting way. He was the feline Buddha of capitalism. And while Fancy Feast catered to emotion and aspiration, Morris offered detachment, a sardonic wink at the human condition. He didn't care about your troubles. He didn't care about politics. He didn't even care about you. He just cared about getting the right food. And somehow, that was deeply relatable. But then, as with all wars, the battle lines began to blur. The major players had conquered the market. The shelves were full. The jingles were stuck in every American head. So the only place left to fight was the soul. The late 1970s became the age of cat food as identity politics. Friskies positioned itself as the choice of wholesome, working-class cat owners, practical, down-to-earth, no nonsense. 9 Lives became the witty, self-aware, urban, intellectual choice that I read magazines and my cat judges me demographic. Fancy Feast cornered the aspirational middle class, people who wore polyester and dreamed of crystal chandeliers. Each brand wasn't just selling to pet owners. They were selling to archetypes. Your cat's food was now an extension of you. And Americans, being Americans, embraced this with terrifying enthusiasm. Soon, magazines were running think pieces with titles like What Your Cat Food Says About You. Some of them were satire. Some of them weren't. It was an age of pure, unfiltered projection. Because, let's be honest, cats don't care about social status. They don't care about brand loyalty. They don't care about your fragile human ego. But you do. And if you think your cat is too good for store brands, congratulations. You've been successfully colonized by marketing. One sociologist, an actual sociologist, summed it up best in a 1979 interview. The cat food industry is the purest form of capitalism. It sells meaning to creatures that are incapable of consuming it. That quote should be engraved on the entrance to every advertising agency on Earth. By the end of the decade, the war had changed American life in subtle but permanent ways. Cats had become fully domesticated celebrities. Pet aisles had become status battlegrounds. And somewhere in a lab, a scientist was almost certainly staring at a chart labeled Feline Flavor Receptivity Index and wondering where his life went wrong. But the money was pouring in. By 1979. Cat food sales had surpassed $2 billion annually. What had once been a niche product for practical pet owners was now a cultural empire, a glittering monument to the eternal American desire to turn affection into a consumer experience. And the best part? The cats didn't care. Not even a little. They sat in living rooms across the nation, licking their paws, knocking over water glasses, and watching their humans spend small fortunes trying to impress them. It was, in a word, perfect. But the 1980s were coming, and with them a new battlefield, because the 70s had been about emotion. The 80s would be about science. And the cat food companies, drunk on victory, were about to reinvent nutrition itself, or at least pretend to. As the 1980s dawned, America was trading bell-bottoms for business suits, disco balls for briefcases, and good old-fashioned emotional manipulation for science. And like every other industry that survived the 1970s with a hangover and a profit margin, cat food looked around and said, "It's time to rebrand." Gone were the syrupy ads about love and companionship. The 1980s were about facts, data, and the illusion of control. Because if the 1970s were the era of feed your feelings, the 1980s proudly declared, feed the science. The corporations had discovered a magical phrase, feline nutrition. And much like fat-free or new Coke, it meant absolutely nothing. But it sounded unarguable. Suddenly, every cat food company had labs, research departments, and nutrition experts. White coats replaced turtlenecks. Microscopes replaced martini glasses. Marketing executives began using words like protein complexes, essential amino acid ratios, and bioavailability, as if they were planning a moon landing for cats. The commercials changed. Too, gone was the romantic jazz and sultry lighting. Now it was all bright, white laboratories and authoritative voices saying things like, "At Purina, we understand the advanced nutritional needs of your cat." They never explained what those needs actually were, but there were graphs, and graphs mean truth. This was the birth of the scientific cat revolution. Friskies started advertising balanced formulas. 9 Lives introduced nutritionally complete meals. Fancy Feast claimed to use gourmet ingredients enhanced with vitamins, even though, if you looked closely, the ingredients still read like a grocery list from a post-apocalyptic bunker. Meat, byproducts, animal digest, taurine, water sufficient for processing, artificial flavor. But that's the genius of marketing. If you say taurine in a serious enough voice, people forget that it's basically stuff we already put in it, but more. The big innovation of the decade, though, was vitamins. Cat food companies realized that they could slap the word fortified on the label and charge 20% more, and nobody would question what the food was fortified with. Vitamin E, vitamin D, vitamin love. Who knows? One brand even bragged that it contained scientifically proven antioxidants. Proven by whom? Unclear. Probably a guy named Craig who once owned a microscope. But perhaps the most hilarious development of all came from the creation of feline life stage nutrition. This was the idea, revolutionary in its nonsense, that cats needed different foods for different ages. Kitten formula, adult formula, senior formula. Each one, of course, more expensive than the last. It was brilliant. You could now guilt people into 3 separate purchases for the same cat over its lifetime. And because cats don't live very long, you could keep the emotional cycle short and profitable. Meanwhile, the scientists, real scientists this time, were quietly screaming, "See, actual feline nutritionists are a real profession now." Thanks to capitalism began pointing out that many of these new formulas were bad. Too much ash, too much filler, not enough meat, or worse, too much meat that wasn't technically meat. But no one listened to the scientists unless they were in the commercials. And the commercials were booming. By 1983, cat food advertising budgets had surpassed $250 million annually. To put that in perspective, that's more money than the US government spent that year on the actual Department of Agriculture's animal welfare programs. In other words, the cat food industry cared about cats' well-being, as long as it was profitable. And the musket arms race continued. Fancy Feast launched its famous White Cat campaign, a series of commercials featuring a regal white Persian cat dining on silver trays in a European mansion. The tagline, "Good taste is easy to recognize." It was the cat food equivalent of a champagne ad, and it worked. People started dressing up their cats for dinner, setting out napkins, pouring the food into bowls shaped like chalices. And if that sounds insane, remember, it was the 1980s. People were microwaving everything, wearing shoulder pads to brunch, and selling diet pills made of chalk dust. Cats eating like royalty was, frankly, one of the saner trends. But not everyone could afford luxury for the working class. There were still 9 Lives, now leaning even harder into its every cat charm. Morris was still the face of the brand, still smirking at America from cereal boxes, talk shows, and occasionally your nightmares. But Morris was getting older. The original cat, the real one, the one rescued from an Illinois shelter, had become a legend. He'd traveled the world. He'd shaken hands and bitten a few. And in 1978, when he passed away, General Foods did what any self-respecting company would do. They replaced him. Quietly, subtly, repeatedly. There were multiple Morrises now, each identical, each carefully trained to embody that same aura of sardonic cool. And the public didn't care, because Morris wasn't a cat anymore. He was an idea. An eternal symbol of feline confidence and corporate continuity. Every time a new Morris appeared, it was treated like a secret changing of the guard, a feline Vatican succession, one orange prophet for another. And that's how 9 Lives achieved immortality. Morris never aged. Morris never died. Morris simply reincarnated, like a furry corporate Buddha with a marketing degree. By the end of the decade, the science phase of the cat food war had cemented one ultimate truth. It didn't matter what cats wanted. It mattered what humans believed cats wanted, and humans, bless their hearts, believed everything. By the late 1980s, capitalism had become self-aware enough to realize it could sell enlightenment. And the cat food industry, never one to miss a feeding opportunity, said, "We'll have that with a side of gravy." The science era had done its job. People trusted the nutrition experts. They believed in taurine, fortified formulas, and the concept of bioavailable happiness. But as humans themselves grew disillusioned with corporate science, the processed foods, the sugar, the neon-colored everything, the next great marketing frontier appeared on the horizon like a shimmering mirage. Authenticity. Suddenly, everyone wanted natural. Natural yogurt, natural deodorant, natural disasters. And so the cat food companies pivoted once again. This time faster than you could say grain-free holistic blend. Welcome to the age of boutique cat food. It began innocently, as all profitable revolutions do. A few small brands started advertising real ingredients, claiming their food was made with human-grade meat. This, of course, raised an obvious question: which human? But it didn't matter. Human-grade sounded luxurious, and soon every supermarket aisle was bursting with words that had absolutely no nutritional definition: pure, wholesome, garden-inspired. The labels became miniature works of fiction. Wild-caught salmon with garden greens, free-range chicken with country vegetables, tuna fillet, eel or Provence. Each one sounded like something Julia Child would whisper over a pan of butter, not something meant for a 12-pound creature that licks dust off its own fur. And yet, Americans adored it, because this new movement wasn't really about the cats anymore. It was about the owners. These were the yuppie years, the years of fitness, of jogging suits, of kitchen blenders that cost more than cars. Everyone was obsessed with health. Everyone was terrified of preservatives. Everyone had recently discovered that cholesterol was a word. And so the question naturally arose: if I'm eating better, shouldn't my cat? This was corporate poetry. In boardrooms across America, executives smiled the slow, predatory smiles of men who knew exactly how to turn existential guilt into quarterly profit. They launched organic lines, gourmet natural lines, and the holy grail, prescription diets. Ah yes, the prescription diet, the ultimate act of marketing transubstantiation, where ordinary meat paste was rebranded as medicine. Now, instead of buying cat food, you were treating a condition: urinary tract support, hairball control, indoor weight management formula, each one designed to sound life-saving, each one costing approximately the same as an actual medical procedure in 1954. But here's the thing: people paid it, because by now, the relationship between humans and cats had fully evolved. From owner and pet to codependent roommates in emotional therapy, cats weren't just animals anymore. They were extensions of self. And if you were eating low-fat, high-fiber, ethically sourced foods that you didn't understand, by God, your cat would too. The advertising adapted. Gone were the white-coated scientists. In their place, rolling meadows, sunlit kitchens, and slow-motion shots of cats leaping gracefully through impossibly clean houses. The music was acoustic guitar. The tone was soulful. The message was clear. Feed her what nature intended, which was ironic, because nature intended cats to eat mice, not quinoa. But the point wasn't accuracy. It was aesthetic morality. To feed your cat well was to prove that you were a good person. Responsible, loving, enlightened. It wasn't about nutrition. It was about narrative. And thus began the great divide in American pet ownership. The supermarket cats, pragmatic, middle class, nourished by 9 lives and Friskies. And the boutique cats, upper middle class, groomed and fed on brands with names like Wellness, Nature's Recipe, and Blue Buffalo, all of which sounded like yoga retreats. It was cat food as social currency. There were even whispers, whispered, very quietly, because this was before Instagram, that some people were serving warm cat food, heated to release the aroma. Yes, people were microwaving cat food to please their cats. This was the point where civilization officially lapped itself. The 1970s had been about love. The 1980s had been about science. And the 1990s were about virtue. People wanted to feel pure. And if they couldn't be pure themselves, at least their cats could be. It was a kind of moral outsourcing. You couldn't fix capitalism, but you could buy a holistic tuna medley and pretend you were saving the planet. And the corporations, they loved it, because every guilt, every anxiety, every fleeting sense of inadequacy could now be solved with a trip down the pet aisle. Is your life chaotic? Feed your cat something called Serenity Blend. Feeling disconnected from nature? Try Woodland Harvest Stew. Worried about mortality? Longevity Formula. Now with real cranberries. Each label a miniature confession. Each purchase a tiny absolution. And all the while, the cats remained cats. They didn't care about the branding. They didn't care about the moral theater. They didn't even notice the difference between premium holistic and bargain chunk style. They just ate, napped, and occasionally stared into the distance like philosophers mocking their patrons. If you listen closely, you can almost hear them thinking, humans are strange, but they do keep the bowl full. And maybe that's the secret to everything. Because the truth of the billion-dollar cat food war was never about the food. It was about what the food meant. Every jingle, every label, every commercial was a mirror, reflecting back our own confusion, our own longing to love something uncomplicated. And if that something occasionally coughed up a hairball on the carpet, well, that was just part of the charm. And so we arrive in the present, a world of streaming, smartphones, and artisanal oat milk, still haunted, quietly, by the echoes of a war fought over fish paste half a century ago. The billion-dollar cat food war never truly ended. It just changed uniforms. What began in the 1970s as a battle for brand dominance has become something far subtler, far stranger, and infinitely more profitable. The eternal monetization of affection. Today, the grocery aisles are temples of glossy packaging. The commercials are mini soap operas. And the internet is filled with influencers, both human and feline, purring their way to endorsement deals. Cats have gone from anonymous house pets to personal brands. They have merchandise. They have sponsorships. They have entire careers. Grumpy Cat earned more money than most human actors. Lil Bub funded medical research. And Morris the cat, the eternal, reincarnated mascot of 9 lives, still lives on. Immortal and unimpressed, staring out from TV screens and reminding us that no matter how much humanity evolves, our collective priorities remain questionable. but the war's old tactics still live on. 2. The language of guilt is now wellness. The language of science is now sustainability. And the language of love has been upgraded to mindful pet care. The ads whisper softly, lovingly, accusingly, "Wouldn't you want your cat to thrive?" And there it is. The old trap, the beautiful, expensive illusion that feeding your cat well is somehow feeding your soul. Modern cat food brands now compete in an absurd arena of moral purity. They promise wild-caught, grain-free, humanely sourced, non-GMO, veterinarian-approved, and, in one spectacular case, spiritually balanced. Spiritually balanced. Imagine a corporate meeting where someone confidently said, "What if we balanced the chakras of cats through salmon?" And everyone nodded. And then they printed it on the label. That's where we are now. The 21st century. Cat food war isn't about nutrition. It's about identity, virtue, and Instagram aesthetics. You can now buy ancestral diets for your cat, raw. Freeze-dried meat designed to mimic what wild cats eat. Never mind that your house cat couldn't catch a moth if it was legally required. You can subscribe to cat meal kits, where artisanal blends of organic turkey arrive at your door in recyclable packaging, accompanied by handwritten notes, like, "Your cat deserves the world." And, of course, you can buy CBD cat treats, because nothing says evolution like getting your cat mildly stoned. To relieve the anxiety of being a cat. It's beautiful. And it's insane. And somewhere out there, in a boardroom, in a marketing agency, in a research lab filled with clipboards and optimism, someone is still asking the same question first asked in 1970. What do cats really want? And the answer, unchanged across 50 years and billions of dollars, remains, we have no idea. Because that's the punchline, the secret, the glorious cosmic joke of it all. Cats don't care. They never did. They didn't care in 1972, when executives were measuring mouthfeel. They didn't care in 1985 when vitamins were the hot trend. They didn't care in 1994 when commercials featured cats running through meadows, like they were auditioning for a perfume ad. They don't care now, as you hover over them holding a $4 tin of grass-fed venison so full. Cats exist outside of marketing. They cannot be branded, optimized, or guilt-tripped. They do not believe in human nonsense. They are, perhaps, the only truly enlightened consumers left. They accept what is given. They reject what they dislike. They remain perfectly indifferent to the great machinery of human ambition. And that's why they won. Because while humans have spent 50 years trying to turn their affection into a product, cats have quietly turned that product back into attention, comfort, and free housing. The cats didn't just survive capitalism. They domesticated it. They trained us, patiently, elegantly, to provide food, shelter, and affection in exchange for the occasional blink of approval. We call it owning a pet. But let's be honest. It's servitude. Elegant, mutually beneficial servitude. And so, when you walk down the pet food aisle today, surrounded by the soft hum of air conditioning and the distant echo of corporate dreams, you're not just looking at cans and pouches. You're looking at history. Decades of marketing genius, millions of jingles, a whole civilization's attempt to turn love into a business model. And the beautiful part, It worked, not because the food got better, but because the story got better. Because, deep down, humans don't want cat food. They want to be loved. They want to be understood. They want to believe that when their cat looks at them with that ancient, condescending stare, there's something sacred in it. And maybe there is. Because cats, in their quiet, inscrutable way, remind us that life doesn't have to make sense to be meaningful. That comfort can be absurd. That affection can be ridiculous. That love can be bought, canned, and labeled, but only ever borrowed. And when you scoop that food into the bowl tonight, maybe you'll remember the great war that made it possible. The scientists, the jingles, the slogans, the Morris clones, $1 billion of human yearning, all condensed into one small gesture, a clink of a can, a meow of expectation, a transaction older than language. Because in the end, the cats didn't need to win the war. They only needed to wait. They knew, as they always know, that eventually we'd feed them anyway. So sleep now, dreamer. Dream of bright supermarket aisles and jingles that never die. Dream of cats on velvet thrones, licking their paws like philosophers. Dream of a world where meaning comes in 12-ounce tins and love smells faintly of tuna. Because the war is over, the prophets are in, the cats are asleep, and all is, somehow, absurdly well. Good night, America. And don't forget, Morris is still watching.